Welcome to the Addiction Solution Podcast. I'm Michelle Dunbar. Enjoy listening and watching as addiction experts Mark Sheeran and I cover controversial as well as helpful topics on addiction, how to move past it, and other related subjects. As two of the co-founders of the Freedom Model, Mark and I will give you a completely new perspective on the topics that matter to you. We will take to task the Recovery Society's lies and misinformation and replace them with facts, research, and the methods to move on from addiction struggles without 12-step meetings, rehabs, and the shackles of endless recovery. Let's escape the treatment and recovery trap together and learn to be free. Welcome to the truth. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Addiction Solution. I'm Michelle Dunbar.
And I'm Mark Sheeran.
And we wrote the Freedom Model for Addictions, Escape the Treatment and Recovery Trap with our colleague, Stephen Slate.
Yes. So I want to talk about the various things that we got going on. So we have the Freedom Model Coaching Certification Program, which is really what we're focusing on right now. We're going to talk a little bit about that, not specifically that program, but more the topic for today's podcast is going to be what it's been like working in a system that is the addiction help system that is unbelievably counter to what we do, right? It's the opposite. The Freedom Model is the opposite of the entire industry. So we work within an industry and we're the disruptors.
Yeah.
And so what has that been like? Now, some of our other podcasts talk about different stages that we've gone through and different challenges that we've had in the industry. But we'll get into some of the details on that today.
Yeah. And also what it's like, we have people that contact us all the time from within the addiction treatment system and the mental health system that are extremely frustrated themselves working within a system that they can see is not helping people. And when they find the Freedom Model, often they're encouraged and at the same time discouraged, right? They're encouraged that there is a solution and they're discouraged because the system that they're working in isn't open to it.
Yeah. So I guess to frame this out, we're going to start with the discussion about we have this certification course. The question is, how did we get here? Right. Where there's this sort of drive to get people to sign on to the Freedom Model and proliferate that throughout the world. And the reason that we've decided that that's going to be our focus for the next 10 to 20 years is simple. And that is, there's this massive system that exists, the recovery industry, that is harmful.
Yeah.
It's harmful.
It's literally designed to keep people within it. It's not designed to help people solve a problem. It's designed to make them a part of a system forever. And look do I think that the people, and we've said this before, do I think that the people that are part of that industry are nefarious? No, I think the vast majority are not. I think they think that they're helping, but they're misinformed and they don't understand the harm that they're doing.
Yeah. So what has it been like for us to be the disruptors and be the people that challenged this entire paradigm? Well, it's an interesting thing as a researcher, as a human behavior researcher. Did you want to jump in?
No.
Oh, okay. As a human behavior researcher, for my whole life, right? So we founded Baldwin Research and the Freedom Model in 1989. And I met Michelle a year later, about 6 months later. And basically we did this whole project together. I didn't know anything when I started. What I knew is discontent. I knew that what I had experienced in treatment and being in the cult of Alcoholics Anonymous as a young kid, my whole family was immersed in that model. I knew that something was wrong. I knew that logically there were things that immediately I knew didn't make sense. This idea that I was powerless over alcohol. I only felt powerless after I was told that narrative. And I knew that. I knew that that was the case. I knew that really deep down inside, I knew I was choosing this habit, even though I was willing to pay the price of that habit, which was very high. So when people would say things in the treatment industry or in AA that were obviously not true, but I was then pushed to repeat the lie, I knew that I just wasn't willing to do that. And when I became vocal about, I think AA is a bit crazy. And I think that rehabs are in it for the money. And in the beginning, that's really all I knew. I knew that treatment didn't work. I was watching people cycle in and out. And I was watching friends of mine die in the system. And here's the crucial part. When I realized that when somebody would die and the staff of said rehab or said halfway house would say, well, they just didn't want it enough. And I knew that person. Yeah. And I knew the desperation that that person had. I knew that that wasn't true. I knew that there was a ruse. I knew that there was an excuse-making thing happening here. And that was, if you bought a car and the car didn't work from day one and it failed, we wouldn't blame the driver. We would say, what was wrong mechanically with this thing, And especially if they drove the car and followed the directions, and in this case, went to the meetings and went to their group therapy, and they opened up and they shared and they took the naltrexone or the Antabuse or the Suboxone, and they did that. And then eventually they stopped doing all that and went back to their old ways. And that's the part that the treatment industry points at and says, see, they were non-compliant. And it's really interesting because their product is to get them to stick around.
To choose.
Yeah. If their model is predicated on you have to be in recovery the rest of your life, and then the person doesn't go into recovery for the rest of it, then you failed. You're because your model is stick around one day at a time. And
your model is basically you need to choose not to do that thing and do this thing instead. That's the model.
Right.
It's still choice based, but they confuse the issue by saying it's not. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. That's so convoluted, and here's the interesting thing. So there are people in the world that will follow with blind faith certain things, and they will close their eyes to anything that doesn't agree with that thing that they're following. Right. And they may even get angry when there's people point out evidence that what they're following may be not accurate.
Yep.
And so that's when you look at AA, that's about 5% of the people. And or the treatment system as a whole, the addiction treatment system, which is largely based on this idea that people are powerless and they have a disease. And so that's only about 5%.
Yeah.
Overall.
Yeah.
That won't question it and that will become zealots about it. That's religion, folks.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're gonna back up. So what has it been like for us?
Yeah.
To be the disruptors, to be the
person saying, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And I can tell you that in the beginning, it was really hard.
Oof.
It was really hard because AA, you never really, when you're going against a paradigm, and it doesn't matter what it is, it could be about any topic. If you go against the paradigm while you're in it, what that signifies is that you agree to a portion of it, which puts you in a very, very precarious position as the paradigm shifter. And that is, by my participation in AA and the treatment community and the recovery community, and by coming up with different ways of doing quote unquote recovery, not realizing that I was completely against it at that time. I didn't understand that yet. So I was still participating in it, but being anti. So try to imagine being in a room filled with people that all have the same opinion. Yeah. And you're one of the people that also had the same opinion. And then one day you decide, I don't agree with this. And so you say that. Imagine a sterile room, a highly charged emotional topic. Everybody agrees on the solution. They're browbeating that solution. They're repeating it. They have mantras and slogans and infrastructure and money involved. And their entire lives are guided by this. And then one person in the room says, I don't think this makes much sense. What happens? Ooh. Just imagine that everybody's eyes descend on that person and it becomes really uncomfortable. Now put that on a macro level at an area within AA in the rehab industry of a district, like imagine a county of people, but it's bigger than that. Imagine like a big chunk of your state of people that have that opinion. Well, that's what it was like for us.
Yeah, it was.
And that was the beginning. And it was awful. It was awful. They vandalized my house. They sent out newsletters against me and Michelle's dad and put my name in a paper and told lies about us. Really, really
slanderous, like truly slanderous.
Yeah,
stuff.
Disgusting defamation. And they came after us. And they got the police involved, and they got code enforcement officers, and they, saying we weren't under code for our retreat, and there was nothing wrong, and they lied about that, went to the press with that, and then when that didn't work, they had police officers threaten us without warrants, came in our house, searched our house, and thankfully Michelle's father he didn't give a flying shit. He kicked him right out. He threw him right out of the house, and threatened them back. And then we sued them, and there were a whole bunch of lawsuits that went back and forth through the years, and we ended up winning.
This was all happening in the 90s, by the way, the 1990s.
Yeah. So that's the room of people, and you are the person that's going to say, I don't agree with this. The paradigm itself, the opinions, what is a paradigm? It's the opinions or a set of beliefs of those people. And so when you challenge it, there's a massive initial pushback. And Thomas Kuhn wrote a book about this, a paradigm shift. You can read about it. The initial reaction is violent, pushing back. You just got to stick with it long enough. And so why did I do that? We were just talking about this. So why do I come to work every day for 36 years fighting this uphill battle? And I'll let Michelle tell her reasons. But for me, it's not an uphill battle. I think initially it had to be, because when you have that initial shock against the paradigm, you have to be tough. And luckily me, Jer, Michelle, and others were tough enough to get through that. You also have to be very passionate about what you do. I believed in finding an alternative, but now it's not a battle, even though there's a lot of dissenting opinion on the freedom model. I don't battle anybody.
Nope.
I just say the truth and let it sit and simmer with people. And there's a lot of people that agree. And I don't have to deal. If somebody says, if I get a troll on one of our sites or one of our YouTube videos or whatever, I just sort of chuckle and I play with them. I have humor, and I don't.
Yeah, they're not a threat anymore, because the vast majority will say, well, we put it in a book, so you could just read the book, and then we can have an honest debate. Literally nobody's willing to do that. So
yeah.
Done. So it was about, I think, 2006, 2007, 2008. I went back to college, and I hadn't finished my undergraduate degree, which was in psychology. I changed my major a bunch of times in the 80s because I was a bit of a party girl. And so by, fast forward, I was here working for, Baldwin Research, which was it's our parent research company. And we were on, like, I think the 10th edition, 11th edition of the book.
Yeah, probably.
And so I was in school, but I was also, so I had access to all of this research. I mean, when you go to online college back then, online school was a pretty relatively newer thing, right? It was, it'd be like 2006, 2005, 2006. And so when I went back to school, now all of a sudden you didn't have to be at a college, you didn't have to be in a library. You had access to all the research in the world that had ever been done right at your fingertips. I mean, it was remarkable. It was such a different experience than going to college in the 80s. It was awesome. And so I think it was the 11th edition. So I spent a ton of time, like Mark would make these wild claims, right? He would say, I think this is true. And then I would go and look it up and see if I could find supporting data.
Yep, you and Steve.
Yeah, to look it up. So I spent hours and hours doing this while ironically going to school to finish my degree in behavioral health, right? In psychology and behavioral health. Within the paradigm that is addiction is a disease. People are rendered powerless. I was within that paradigm doing research to debunk that paradigm. So you can imagine when back then, I don't know what online school is like now, but when you went to online school back then, you had to be in these discussion groups. And I literally got death threats in my discussion groups. I was so bullied in my discussion groups by the paradigm crowd that I actually went to one of my professors and showed him the thread and said, I will not be participating in this discussion group anymore. And I got an A in that class. But that's what the pushback is like and I know that there are people out there listening to this who now, I did keep going to school. I didn't let the bullies kick me out. I did do research papers making claims that were addiction is not a disease and supporting them. The research is there. Yeah. And then we had people, I wanted to keep going to school and get my graduate degrees and we had PhDs and academic types on our board of directors. And I remember, I think it was Peter. I think it was Dr. Venarelli said to me, he goes, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't keep going to school. And you don't waste your money. Don't waste your time. He's like, all of that exists to keep the paradigm exactly as it is.
Yeah. I mean, just try to imagine that she's going back to school and we have these amazing board members and we've done this amazing work for decades. And we wrote this, we're on the verge
which is bigger than any thesis anybody's ever written.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's a world changing solution to addiction and is recognized by the top names in research.
And Dr. Venarelli is like, you've already done it. You're good.
He's like, stop wasting your time. You're just learning the old paradigm. What a complete waste of time. So what else is it like when you're doing this? Well, we did have sometimes board of directors purges where we had to get rid of board directors that didn't want to
go where we were going.
Yeah. That just were too frightened to move forward. And we're riding both sides of the fence and disagreed with things, the direction we were going and wanted it more like rehab. And that's not what we do. It never was. So we've had those kind of conflicts. But the other side of it is, ultimately, why would I or she, Michelle, stay in something that seems so contentious? And the answer is, it wasn't contentious all the time.
No.
Because the students,
that's it.
The students were open and wanted something different, like I did, like she did. And they agreed. They said, I don't want to go to meetings the rest of my life. I don't want to be in this system where every day I'm showing up at a clinic to get my methadone. It disgusts me. I hate it.
I don't want to be a slave.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a slave to recovery. I don't want to be a slave to the substance, or whatever behavior. I want when you watch people transform and find freedom, it's amazing.
Well, it's everything. It's why we do what we do. And I think too, here's some ancillary benefits about doing this. One is I have 3 children and they grew up around this business, right? And all the discussions, and my wife was involved and worked for the company for many years. And so it's been a family business. And Michelle is basically my sister, and my best friend growing up is her husband, and
he worked for the company for many years.
Yeah.
And our children have worked for the company,
Yeah.
have helped us in many ways. And some of our siblings have been a part of the company. I mean, it's been tremendous.
And so what happens is the ancillary benefit are the conversations that I've had with my children as they grew up, and they were getting the misinformation. And you know what? My kids don't have that. They're not confused about drinking, drugging, drug effects, or any of that. They also got to experiment with substances without judgment, which made their periods of time with substances very brief and pretty low key in comparison, certainly, to what I experienced, which was filled with mythology and the powers of drugs and all the diabolical bullshit that goes on in the recovery community of building the drug up into these powerful entities. So there were side benefits in my immediate sphere that were massive. And that was my kids and their kids will never know the treatment lies. Now they know them, they know of them, but they'll never have that be a part of their life. They'll never feel powerless. And consequently, when you deal with something that is so paradigmatically a part of your culture, and then your children from a young age understand how to critically think about that paradigm in a different way and see the truth, they're able to look through a lot of the media ruse with other things, other movements that are bullshit and our means of control. So what I did as a parent, and I know Michelle did too, is we taught our kids the difference between a freedom model, which is critically think, you're capable from birth, you're autonomous with your own mind, you can think for yourself, you have free will, and you're motivated by happiness, the desire for benefits and happiness and fulfillment. And you can apply that to anything. So what is it like being a part of the freedom model professionally is that it's like a stone. The stone is the core of what I just described. And that is autonomy, free will, the positive drive principle. You understand those things. If you do, and you teach that to your children, that's the core. That's the stone that gets tossed in the pond. And then the ripples out are that their kids and their kids' kids will never be controlled. And that's where happiness lies. Now, some people's happiness does lie in being controlled. You see it in AA every day. You see it in treatment communities where you might, in our case, introduce the freedom model to somebody and they go, no, I want my meetings. And then I walk away. I go,
yeah, it's okay.
Cool. If you're one of those people that like no risk, like the insulation of recovery lies, and you want to live in those lies. And I'm not saying that condescendingly.
No, not at all.
I'm saying it in an accurate way.
Ironically, that is your freedom. That is you making that choice. You're still applying the freedom model.
That's exactly right.
You're just doing it in that way.
That's right. So the freedom model doesn't tell you what to think. And so what is it like being a freedom model? That brings us into the coaching paradigm. Now, anytime that I am either professionally coaching somebody or engaging with somebody in my private life, I don't have anything to prove. No. I say, this is the truth. Here's the objective truth. Take it or leave it. And sometimes I don't even bring up the truth because I don't have to judge their life. I only help those that ask for my help. Now, if you're a professional, let's say that you're a psychiatrist. We deal with this every day. If you're a psychiatrist, psychologist, and you're sending people, unbeknownst to you, you're sending them to rehabs that are harmful, but you don't know that. You think you're sending them to some place that's going to help them because you're not an expert really in addiction, right? In this whole paradigm. But they keep coming back worse. And you're thinking to yourself, am I doing a bad job? I mean, it shakes your confidence as a coach, as a psychiatrist in these areas, specifically with quote unquote addiction. And so we see it a lot where what we end up doing is we end up helping these professionals figure out, oh, I have competence and confidence in dealing with trauma, stress, depression, anxiety, all these different fields. But when it comes to quote unquote addiction, I start to feel like I'm on my heels. I send them to rehabs, people come back worse. I send them to AA meetings, they come back worse. They come back with horror stories. And I don't have an answer for them. And so when we work with the professionals, that's why we created the certification course. That's exactly why we said to ourselves, you know, we've certified internally many of our coaches, but now it's time to go out to the public because they're yearning for it. And I didn't see this with professionals. Maybe it's a sort of maturation of this entire industry where people are now professionals. They've invested all this time. They're tenured. They're senior psychiatrists, right? In different firms.
Different mental health professionals, right? There's a variety of different certifications in mental health.
And now they're saying something's really wrong because it's not working. I don't know how to help these people. Well, we do. We do know because we paid the price. So I think that for us, there's a real excitement around being able to teach these open-minded professionals a completely different way that we learned the hard way over 36 years of doing this and helping 27,000 plus people solve their problem.
And I think there's a real, one of the things I think that is added to the problems with mental health and addiction is this idea of underlying causes of addiction. And that is something that we're the only ones that say what we say, that have shown unequivocally that there is no cause for addiction, that trauma doesn't automatically cause addiction, and depression and anxiety and all of these different things don't cause heavy substance use problems or other addictions. Certainly they can become reasons. And so in this certification course, we explain my rubber band ball, right? Like when you tell somebody, oh, we've got to solve your depression before we can solve your substance use problem, you have unknowingly, first of all, lied. It's not the truth. The vast majority of people solve their substance use problems long before they solve their mental health problems. That's just the data. And so, but you've also created this infinite loop that they can't escape from. So we want to show you, no, you have to unravel these things. These are called learned connections. That's what we coined that term of learned connections. And that not only can you unravel them and separate them, but then it becomes much easier to help them solve each.
Annually disconnecting a life problems from a substance use habit, and the life problems that we attach to substance use and create these supposed causal relationships with are hugely problematic.
Yes.
Because once you believe that that depression causes substance use, that trauma causes, and use the word cause, you don't realize that you've created a massive problem.
Yes.
You've put the problem on steroids. And you may be a therapist right now thinking, oh, that's bullshit. Trauma does cause addiction.
We get a lot of pushback on this.
Yeah. And it's all in the nuance here. We're not saying that trauma isn't a reason.
A factor.
Yeah, a factor. That's a good way of saying it. And a reason, but cause and reasons. We have an entire chapter just on defining the difference between a reason and a cause.
And why it's so important to know that difference.
Yeah. So what is it like for us as the Freedom Model co-founders? It's challenging. It's challenging. But what's really exciting is it's all written in a book that is now worldwide. It's all here. You can read the book. If you don't believe what I'm saying, read it. The research is there. The experience that we have is there. But more than that, there's all kinds of citations of other people's research that corroborates what we're talking about here. So we're hitting a lot of different topics that you might be saying, whoa, that's a bridge too far. I get that.
Sure.
That's what we deal with every single day of our job. And when you're changing a paradigm, you got to go with the objective truth. And words matter. Defining things, what we say and what we believe is what guides our emotions, not the other way around. So we have to tackle beliefs. And sometimes in an industry of psychiatry, in an industry of psychology, it's attacking beliefs about what you've been teaching people maybe for an entire career.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough to come to a certain look at anybody. If you've never experienced a moment in your career where you thought, holy shit, I've been doing that all wrong, then you're still doing something all wrong, because I don't like, if you're open to learning, that should be happening repeatedly. I can tell you that has happened to us multiple times. I mean, we spent a whole decade doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we threw away powerlessness right off the rip, but we kept a lot of other bullshit that was esoteric and didn't mean anything or was harmful. And so maybe it is time. Don't be afraid to open your mind to the possibility that whatever you're doing, you can do better and be more effective at it. And maybe recognize that some of the, if you've had clients where you were like, I just couldn't help that person, it's not because you failed to a certain extent, it's because maybe you just didn't have the right information.
Yeah. And then there are, of course, the rare case where I turn people away. So what is it like to be, in this industry? There are people where I say, or I don't want to help them because they're unwilling to engage with me in a productive way. That's incredibly rare. But there are people that I deal with where I say within the first session,
this is probably not going to work.
Yeah, I don't want to argue with you to try and save your life. I have no dog in this fight. I have no judgment, but I know I can't help you, and that's okay.
People are not open. Unfortunately, in a human behavior industry, there has to be a willingness and an openness to understanding that you're the only one that can solve your problem.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So we're going to end on that. So it's, we've been doing this for 36 years because we love it. We love teaching professionals. We love teaching the students and the clients, whatever you call them.
We do. And we love training.
Yeah.
We love training new coaches. That personally, for me, is one of my favorite jobs.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, because when you see their eyes light up, that ripple in the pond just got much bigger.
It sure did.
And the effect of the freedom that people feel gets bigger and bigger. And it's about freeing people to move on with their lives. Ultimately, not keep them in recovery, keep them in meetings, keep them in rehabs, keep them on Suboxone for life. None of this is about that. This is about freedom, true freedom to move on. So if that sounds appetizing, give us a call and we can talk about training you.
All right, let me give you some logistics. First of all, if you're watching this on YouTube, there is a QR code in the corner of the screen, and that is to download our free mobile app. On that mobile app, you will see a ton of free video content, as well as our free ebooks are on there as well, and information about our certification program, as well as coaching. If you're watching this and you are struggling and you want to be coached by Mark or I or one of our certified coaches, there's information on there as well about all of our different products, our workshops, our online program. We have so many incredible resources at all different price points that are designed to help you to solve your problem for good, not just one day at a time, right? Not just you can move past recovery. We have a 12-step deprogramming course. It's wonderful. If you're somebody that wants to move on from 12-step programs and recovery in general. So, but if you have questions, our phone number is up there as well. But for people who are listening, go to thefreedommodel.org and you can get all the information you need there, or call us at 1-888-424-2626.
That's right. And when you go to the site, go to the certification tab and you can check out the coaching certification program.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.